Izzy, I think Facebook is working.
Yep, I'm just making sure that YouTube is just loading right now. And we are live on YouTube.
Izzy, I think Facebook is working.
Yep, I'm just making sure that YouTube is just loading right now. Okay. And we are live on both platforms.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first Students of the Massachusetts 4th debate for the Democratic congressional candidates running to fill Joe Kennedy's vacant seat. The Students of the Massachusetts 4th is a student-led coalition dedicated to engaging young voters, and we've organized this congressional debate to promote civic discussion and help voters make an informed decision. We want to especially thank our media sponsor, WBUR City Space at the Levine Center, for their cooperation and help in planning this debate.
Over the next 2 hours, we will cover many of the most pressing issues of this moment, including the COVID-19 crisis, the economy, health insurance, civil rights, climate change, education, gun control, and immigration. We will also talk about campaign funding.
Now, here are the rules for tonight. We'll ask 3 types of questions during this debate. First, we have specific questions addressed to each candidate. Candidates will have 1 minute to answer and will allow 30-second follow-ups from 2 other candidates. Second are raise your hand questions. As it sounds, candidates will raise their hands in response to a statement and will allow 30-second verbal responses from other candidates.
Lastly, we will have questions that all candidates will answer. For these, each candidate will have 1 minute unless we specify otherwise. The order down the line questions has been randomly assigned and is the same for opening and closing statements. The order is as follows. First, Ihsan Leckie, Jake Auchincloss, Jesse Mermel, Becky Grossman, Ben Siegel, Natalia Linos, Alan Casey, and Dave Cavell.
So without further ado, we will let the candidates introduce themselves. Candidates, you now have 90 seconds for your opening statements. Please respect this time as we will mute you after the first verbal warning. So starting with Ihsan Leckie.
Well, thank you to students of MA-04 and WBUR City Space for hosting this debate. We do not have time to waste. Tens of millions of Americans have been lost. Tens of millions of Americans are unemployed and uninsured during the pandemic. We've lost over 130,000 lives. The fossil fuel industry is destroying our planet, and Black and brown Americans are being killed by police. We have to act boldly, and we must act now. We need leaders who represent our diversity and courage, who have the lived experiences to lead with compassion, and who aren't afraid to take on corrupt special interests. I was born in Morocco to a public school teacher and a farmer. We never had much. I came to America at the age of 20 seeking dignity and security, but I quickly found that too many Americans were denied the basic necessities to live. In just over a decade, I went from the girl mopping the floors at a restaurant to taking on the biggest banks on Wall Street. I'm running to bring real change to a Congress that has been bought by Wall Street, and I do not accept a dollar from corporate PACs or lobbyists. Throughout my life, I have been driven by determination to not accept poverty, not for anyone. In Congress, I will fight to dismantle every oppressive system that stands between us and the America we dream of.
Thank you, Ihsan. And now Jake Auchincloss.
Good evening, and thanks for having me. I'm Jake Auchincloss. I'm a Marine veteran. I'm a city councilor in Newton, and recently I'm a new dad. A number of years ago, 3 years ago, I called on the floor of the city council for the impeachment of Donald Trump. And since then, things have only gotten worse. Donald Trump's America is not the America I fought for as a Marine captain. It's not the America I've worked for as a city councilor. And at a time when leadership has failed us from the White House, we need leaders in Congress who will stand up to Trump's dangerous, hateful agenda. In Congress, I will go toe-to-toe with the NRA and their Republican enablers, because as a former Marine Special Operations officer, I know that no civilian needs an assault weapon. I will listen to science, not showboating, so we can beat the coronavirus and take on climate change. And I will be a champion for a green economic recovery. I've taken hard votes in the City Council to build housing, to create jobs, to green our infrastructure, and to fund our public schools. I will do so again in Congress at a time when unemployment is north of 20% in parts of the South Coast. This president has left us a crisis, and we need crisis-tested leaders who can respond on day one. I have led in the military, I have led in business, I have led in government, and I am ready to lead again. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. And now Jessie Mermel.
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you. My name is Jessie Mermel, and I'm running for Congress to take on Donald Trump and his cronies, fight for Medicare for all and for reproductive justice, and to lead an equitable recovery to COVID-19. This is a crowded field, but the people of the 4th Congressional District deserve a proven progressive leader who can fight for what we need to lift up working families in this district. And I've built a 20-year career here in Massachusetts doing just that. From serving as a leader at Planned Parenthood to working side by side with Governor Patrick as a member of his senior team, working in the trenches of local government as a select board member in Brookline, and running the state's progressive business organization. There are real differences in this race. I'm one of few candidates to have consistently supported the policies that we need to create progressive change. Medicare for all, free college and technical school tuition, student debt relief, and defunding police. I've led in this field on transparency by releasing 6 years of my tax returns. And I'm the only progressive who's built a diverse, strong grassroots coalition made up of people like Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, SCIU, mass nurses, math teachers, and so many others. This campaign is powered by people, not by corporate PAC money, not by the fossil fuel industry, or by private wealth. I am so proud of the campaign that we're running, and I hope to prove to you this evening that I'm the candidate with the experience, vision, and team to deliver on a bold progressive future for the 4th Congressional District. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you tonight, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Jessie. And now Becky Grossman.
Thank you for having me this evening. I'm Becky Grossman, and I'm a Newton City Councilor. But the job that I cherish most in my life is being a mom to my 2 kids, Madeline, who's 9, and my son, Jack, who just turned 6. I am running for Congress with the fierce urgency of a mom, fed up by what is going on in this country and determined to make change. In my son Jack's first day of kindergarten, I had to have a conversation with him that parents all over this country are having in struggling to find the words to explain to him what it would mean to run in a zigzag pattern or find a quiet place to hide in his classroom if a shooter were to show up there. That is not a conversation that any parent should ever have to have with their child, or a fear that any child should ever have to live with going to school. And I refuse to allow Congress to offer thoughts and prayers after every school shooting, but fail to do anything to stop the next one. Right now, out of 435 members of Congress, we only have 25 who are mothers of school-age children. I believe that if we had 100 or 200 moms in Congress, it would change the conversation in Washington completely. We need to elect new and different types of leaders to take on the powerful special interests and make progress on our most urgent issues. I'm proud to offer that perspective in this race, and I look forward to taking your questions this evening.
Thank you, Becky. And now Ben Siegel.
Yes, thank you, and good evening, everyone, and thank you, Students for Massachusetts, for helping put together tonight's event. I truly believe that our student leaders are not just the future leaders, but there are leaders today, and that their voices and perspectives need to be heard and have a seat at the table. That's why I am so proud to have created a robust campaign fellowship of almost 50 high school and college students who are the engine of our campaign and helping us to make real lasting change. It's also why I believe it's more important today than ever that we elect a diverse leader who understands the diverse perspectives of our community, who isn't just conveniently Democrat or isn't just conveniently talking about diversity, but who's been advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion for years. We need a leader who's a unifier, a bridge builder, a connector. We need a leader who's going to bring us all together, because we are so much stronger when we are united than we are divided. It is why I am the first and only candidate who has visited all 34 cities and towns in this district. It's why I'm the only candidate who's participated in over 20 marches, rallies, and protests in 14 different cities and towns. I have been that leader for over 20 years, and I will continue to be that leader going forward, whether as the president of the Hispanic National Bar Association of all New England, where I will be the first Latino ever elected to Congress, or at the Democratic Caucus, or as a private attorney. But I believe we need to amplify the voices of all the people and not just buy their votes.
Thank you, Ben. And now Natalia Linos.
Thank you so much, Will, and thank you so much all of you for hosting us tonight. It's a real pleasure to join you. My name is Dr. Natalia Linos, and I'm an epidemiologist who decided to enter this race because of the COVID tragedy around us. Right now, we have over 140,000 Americans who have lost their lives, and this has been felt disproportionately among Black and Brown communities. We also have 70,000 new cases every single day because our federal government has failed us in the most horrific way possible. Right now, if we do not have more scientists who are elected, I fear that the Trump administration will continue to do what it has been doing over the last few months, which is scapegoating, sidelining, and pushing every scientist with the knowledge to help us get through this to the side. This is why I decided to run. I'm a mom of 3-year-old twins and a 7-year-old. This is not a time, it didn't feel like it was the right time to run for office, but it felt urgent, it felt necessary, and it felt that I had a unique skill set. Among this great group of panelists, I'm the only one who has the public health expertise that we need for this moment. But you and I know that COVID isn't the only crisis we're facing. The climate emergency is one that I have fought for and have worked for the last 5 years. I worked at the United Nations Development Program where I led the climate portfolio, the climate and health portfolio. I worked on racial justice at the New York City Health Department. And today I hope to prove to you that I can think across silos and be the candidate that you need in office to move us forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. And now Alan Casey.
Good afternoon. I want to thank students in Massachusetts and WBUR. My name is Alan Casey. I'm a father of 2 Gen Zers. My daughter Mirabelle is 18, my son Reese is 12. I'm also the co-founder of City Year, the co-founder of the Service Year Alliance, the founder of Democracy Entrepreneurs and other nonprofits. When I was your age, I would stay up late at night in college with my friends. We would ask ourselves, how is it in the richest country in the world we could have such levels of poverty, public schools that didn't work for all kids, an environment that needed to be preserved? And we said, what we need to do? We need to build a movement for national youth service. We needed to tap the energy and idealism of young people like you to roll up their sleeves and get involved. It's why I started City Year. We started with 50 young people from all different backgrounds on the common ground of service. Today in Boston, today City Year is in 32 cities around the country and even in the world in South Africa, United Kingdom. In building that movement, I helped to pass 3 major pieces of federal legislation. My role was to bring all the groups together and to put the pressure on Congress and to work to get it done. I had a chance to work with Senator Kennedy, President Clinton. We were the model for AmeriCorps, and President Obama to expand AmeriCorps. If I have the privilege of serving in Congress with you, I don't want to go alone. I want to bring all of you with me. We are in an unprecedented time, and it's going to take movements to get it done. And that's why I'm excited to be with you here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. And last but certainly not least, Dave Cavell.
Well, thank you all, and thank you all for joining us. I'm Dave Cavell, and I want to start by saying that this election is about you, about your future and the kind of world you are already helping reshape. You deserve a member of Congress who won't just say the right things here, but will work with and for students every day to actually pass a Green New Deal, Medicare for all, tuition-free public colleges and universities. Someone who develops every policy with diverse voices, views every issue through a lens of intersectionality and equity and urgency, recognizing that Black lives matter. I think you deserve somebody who isn't taking a dime from police unions, from fossil fuel lobbyists, or being supported by super PACs, and I wish I could say the same about every other candidate here. So why should you vote for me instead of all of these good people? Well, first, I hope I'm the last person ever elected this way. We should have ranked choice voting so that nobody can win with 20%, and more students watching today should be able to vote. The voting age should be 16. Second, I'm the one who doesn't just want to have this job, but I'm ready to do it. I started out teaching 4th grade in the South Bronx. I had students who were homeless and food insecure, so I went into public service. I've spent 15 years working on the front lines of every single one of these issues, with Governor Deval Patrick, with the Obamas in the White House, and with Maura Healey in the AG's office. I think we need a proven progressive in this seat. So do the elected officials in Dighton, Taunton, and Easton who endorsed me last week. So did the first candidate to drop out of this race, Tom Schack. So did John Favreau and Ben Rhodes and so many more. They know this race is about your future and too much is on the line.
Thank you, Dave.
Awesome. So we're going to go into our first round of questions, and these will be pertaining to COVID-19. So as we all know, we're currently living in unprecedented times. The global pandemic, economic recession, and failed leadership has left our country grappling with a crisis that's exposing the deep cracks in our institutions. Our first question for all the candidates: if you were in the House of Representatives right now, how would you address the partisanship in Congress regarding COVID-19 response? And how would you work to make real lasting change? We're going to start with Isan.
Unmute in here. Thank you. Our government has bailed out large corporations and left working people to struggle. Our priorities need to change now. First, we need immediate relief, making sure that all frontline workers have proper PPE, that our hospitals have the ventilators and beds they need, and the financial support to keep them out of bankruptcy. We need to usher $2,000 monthly check for the duration of the crisis to all people, to keep workers on payroll, guarantee healthcare and paid leave for all, and support our local governments. In the longer term, my priority in Congress will be to pass a green economic recovery plan that builds on the Green New Deal and that creates good paying jobs, combats climate change, and creates an economy that works for all. We must transition to a Medicare for all healthcare system that includes long-term care, reproductive justice, dental, vision, and mental health care. We must make the ultra-rich and large corporations pay their fair share in order to guarantee childcare, free pre-K, and affordable housing.
Thank you so much, Isan. We are going to go to Councillor Auchincloss Jake next. And the question was, if you're in the House of Representatives right now, how would you address the partnership in Congress regarding the COVID-19 response and work to make a real lasting change?
This issue is personal to me. My brother is on the front lines of COVID response as a thoracic surgeon at MGH. He was one of the captains of the rapid response team. My dad is Tony Fauci's #2 down in Washington, D.C., so he's dealing with this day in, day out. And what I would say is, in the premise of the question, there's this idea that partisanship on this question must be wrong. If Donald Trump and the Republicans continue to be as incompetent in responding to COVID as they have been, then we're going to need partisanship, because we need some people in Washington, D.C. to step up and lead to ensure that we have a public health infrastructure that can do contact tracing and testing to the degree that will actually keep Americans safe. Now, to the degree that we can reach across the aisle and get something done, the most effective caucus to date has been the 4-Country Caucus. That has been a group of Democrats and Republicans who have all served in uniform and who have already passed COVID relief legislation. And to the extent that I can work with them to do that, I will absolutely make that a priority. But partisanship cannot be the question of the day here. The question of the day needs to be getting testing, contact tracing, and a vaccine development to the American people.
Thank you, Jake. Our next candidate is going to be Jesse. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I'm good. Thank you. You know, we have to center workers, 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 and people over profits and bottom lines. We need so much in order to recover from these competing crises, these overlaid crises. I want to particularly focus on paid family and medical leave. It is essential that we implement both emergency paid family and medical leave now and paid family and medical leave in the long run, and not the nonsense kind that Ivanka Trump is talking about, where you rob your own Social Security just to take time off now. I was on the 8-person team here in Massachusetts that negotiated the strongest paid family and medical leave law in the country. And at this moment of great public health crisis, of great economic crisis, disproportionately impacting caretakers, I think we need to send someone to Washington with the skills to get that done. I've already demonstrated that here in Massachusetts. And as we put workers and public health first, I'm proud to have the support of workers from the Mass Nurses Association, Mass Teachers Association, SEIU, IBEW Local 103, the strongest coalition of workers backing any candidate in this race. If we're going to put workers at the center of our recovery, I'm proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with them in this campaign.
Great, thank you so much, Jessie. We're going to go on to Becky Grossman next. Do you want me to repeat the question?
That's okay, thank you. The first thing we need to do is to get the money out of politics and to get the power out of corporate special interests and back into the hands of people. And if we did that, then I believe that we could get serious about what we need to be doing in Washington right now. Getting another round of relief, putting money into the hands of workers, sustaining unemployment checks at the current level, making sure that our small businesses are supported, making sure that our states and municipalities are supported so that we can invest in our first responders, our educators, and our public health agencies, making sure that we have the resources for testing and the PPE that we need and funding for schools, and also so that industries like the childcare industry would receive the investment and the care and the priority that it deserves and that it needs, rather than corporate special interests, which I think are standing in the way of our ability to make progress in these times on this issue and every other one.
Great, thank you. We're going to move on to Ben Siegel.
Yes, thank you, Izzy. Look, we need to come together here. All the issues dealing with COVID-19, families being devastated, the impact on all of our daily lives isn't a Democrat or Republican issue. It's affecting everyone. We can't just say that your jobs are essential and then treat your lives as if they're not essential. So we need to focus on moving forward under COVID-19 and connect all the dots. We need to make sure that we are putting money and providing resources for our small businesses, especially our Black and brown and our women-owned businesses who fell through the cracks on PPP funds. We need to make sure we're providing resources for our childcare services and our childcare facilities and their workers. We need to pass paid family and medical leave for everyone. We need healthcare coverage and unemployment assistance for all our undocumented workers. And we need to make sure we provide money for PPE for schools and housing and hospitals and all of our business. And finally, we need to make sure all students have internet access and devices to learn remotely.
Great, thank you so much, Ben. We're going to move on to Dr. Linos.
Thanks so much, Izzy. I entered this race because of the depressing failure of this administration to do anything right on COVID. And we're not even there yet to say that we're ready to rebuild. We still have the worst epidemic among any wealthy country. I joined the Poor People's Campaign Health Advisory Committee to talk about workers' rights, not just the workers who are essential workers in hospitals, but also the workers in grocery stores. I wrote pieces in the Washington Post and in Foreign Affairs calling for a health equity approach, because what is happening in Native communities, Native American communities, what is happening in Black and Brown communities, what is happening even here in Massachusetts is unacceptable and also preventable. As an epidemiologist, I believe that right now we need to get the public health response right in order to reopen safely. But I have a 26-page plan which really talks about recovery and rebuilding, because this tragedy has to be an opportunity for us to have the difficult conversations around Medicare for all, around how do we align recovery with the Green New Deal, because in the past, people may have said that these are too costly, but we know what the cost of inaction is. The cost of inaction on our health is shutting down our economies. The cost of inaction on climate change is going to be another pandemic like this one. As a public health expert, I will be loud and clear that we need to use this tragedy as an opportunity to rebuild better, a country that works for all of us.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Linos. We're going to move on to Alan Casey.
Thank you, Izzy. The way we get beyond the partisanship in Washington and deal with the COVID crisis is the way I've done my whole career, which is we have to put people before politics and tap the extraordinary energy that we're seeing across our country to build a movement. And I think we also are entering a New Deal moment. We need big ideas to inspire people with. So here's what I've already put out. We should have a federal jobs guarantee to make sure everybody can go to work. As part of that, we should have 1 million young people in national service on the front lines doing the contact tracing and the public health work and the education work to reopen our schools. We should have Emergency wage support, which I proposed as a way to keep our small businesses open through direct payments, not a convoluted loan program, and keep people on their jobs. We should have a Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission to make sure that the extraordinary protest energy we're seeing actually leads to comprehensive legal policy and cultural change. We need a Green New Deal. And so the way to do this is to actually tap the energy, build a movement, and force Congress to listen to the will of the people. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Alan. And last but certainly not least, we're going to move on to Dave Cavell.
Well, this has been tragically mismanaged from the start. I worked with the pandemic response team in the Obama White House. President Trump decided to disband that team and not listen to expertise. So the first thing we actually need to do is fire him and Mitch McConnell in November. We also need to do short and long-term things here. They're all intersectional, recognize that immigrant communities, minority and women's owned small businesses, and workers have been hardest hit during this pandemic. Short term, let's extend unemployment benefits. Let's make sure that instead of Mitch McConnell telling states to go bankrupt, which is ridiculous, we're fully funding schools. We're preventing teacher layoffs. We're extending eviction moratoriums and hazard pay and childcare and emergency paid sick leave for frontline workers. And given that so many college students are working, I'm the only candidate that called on Governor Baker to lay out a standard for what colleges and universities need to do to safely reopen. Long term, let's pass Medicare for all, let's pass a Green New Deal, and let's save our democracy. Stacey Abrams should be the governor of Georgia responding to this crisis, and she's not because of voter suppression in African-American communities.
Great, thanks so much, Dave. So now we're going to move on to some targeted questions. Just remember, you have 1 minute to answer each question. And if someone raises their hand, we will take 2 rebuttals that are each 30 seconds. So the current president has demanded that schools reopen despite the fact that many children could become infected. That being said, remote classes have led to a large decrease in the productivity of learning, especially for minority communities. Becky, as a mom, how would you approach the challenge of reopening schools?
We've heard pediatricians and health experts talk about the importance of getting kids back in school. And you can ask any parent who's been working how hard this is. But instead of doing the hard work of figuring this out, Trump and Betsy DeVos are bullying school districts and withholding vital resources. Instead, we should be listening to the public health experts. We should be focusing on providing resources to schools and focused on developing policies that schools can actually deliver on to open safely and responsibly. Inequalities have been exacerbated, certainly for those who depend on school meals. Until we have an administration that listens to science and public health experts, I worry that this situation isn't going to get any better. And we need real leadership and real clarity and real support and funding for schools to be able to take care of the safety of our teachers, of our staff, and of our students, and to be leading with safety and health first.
Great, thank you. We're going to take 2 30-second rebuttals from whoever raised their hand first. We're going to go Dr. Linos and then Ben Siegel.
Thanks so much. I think the number 1 priority is to suppress the virus. If we don't suppress the virus, there is no possibility to reopen schools. And as a mom of 3 kids, I agree with Becky that parents are in this difficult situation. They fear sending their kids back. They also fear not sending their kids back because it is so difficult to be a working mom right now. But if we don't suppress the virus, we're all in trouble. And what we need to do is put schools before bars, schools before any other industry, because they're so essential for reducing inequities and including gender inequities for the future of working parents. Thanks.
Thank you. And we're going to go to Ben Siegel.
As the only parent with 4 school-aged children right now, I do so badly want to make sure my kids go back to school, but I'm not willing to sacrifice their health and safety and the health and safety of teachers and parents and our neighbors and our community. So I absolutely agree. We need to listen to the science on this to make sure we can go back. But at the same time, we need to make sure that all kids have internet access and devices so they can learn remotely, so the education inequality gap is not continually to widen under COVID-19.
Great, thank you so much. We're going to move to our next targeted question. Food insecurity has been a major issue for a long time, and the COVID-19 crisis has only made it worse. In the first 3 months of the pandemic, 6 million people applied for food stamps. Isan, a member of the audience asked, What will you do in Congress to address food insecurity? More generally, what will you do to make our country's food system more equitable and sustainable?
Thank you so much. You know, one of the jobs that I held right after college was working for a food bank that oversaw the tri-state area. And I fought hunger so hard. And I saw how state governments at the time, right after the financial crisis of 2008, failed at standing up for the hungry. I fought food deserts in areas where people had to take 2 buses to get to a supermarket. I understand the hunger that we're going through, and it's unnecessary. And I understand that the way to keep food on the table is to immediately usher in $2,000 a month for every individual in our country, no matter what their skin color is, no matter where they were born.
Great, thank you. And we're gonna move to Councillor Auchincloss for a rebuttal.
Right now, 1 in 5 kids in America is food insecure. And that should be a national shame for us. As one of the wealthiest, most developed economies in the world, 1 in 5 kids isn't exactly sure where their next meal is coming from. The first thing any member of Congress should do is pick up the phone and call Congressman Jim McGovern, who has been Congress's leader on this issue for decades. We need to do 2 things immediately: expand SNAP benefits, which we know help kids get the food that they need, and 2, expand the earned income tax credit, which is one of the most effective anti-poverty programs in the history of this country.
Thank you. And we're going to move on to Dave Cavell.
Sorry, food insecurity was all around us before this pandemic. And I'm the only one who actually taught in a public school classroom who's here today. And so I saw food insecurity up close. I was teaching in the South Bronx. It was a food desert. And I had students who did not have enough to eat. They would leave class and come back not having eaten anything. So yes, we need to surge our investments in SNAP benefits, but we need to stop funding big agribusiness and start funding local farmers. You know, I've been donating to food banks across the district during this pandemic, and this is what people are saying. Food insecurity is out of control, and we need people who can actually lead on this issue.
Great, we're gonna move on to the next question. With looming financial losses, many industries have filed for bankruptcy and requested hundreds of billions in federal assistance. Please raise your hand if you support bailouts of large companies right now. Okay, and so we are going to take a response to that. So if we could go with Jessie Mermel first, if you have a specific response to that.
Sure, we need to make sure that we are centering workers when we think about who we're bailing out. Now, of course, that means we need to be getting money in the hands of the industries that support workers. But my priority is bailing out American families. That means $2,000 a month in direct aid. That means making sure that we are creating a real paid family and medical leave program. That makes sure that we're tackling the early childhood and care problem, and that we're figuring out how at some point when it is safe, we reopen our schools. It's making sure that we're ensuring that workers have the PPE that they need to be on the job and not put themselves or their families at any unnecessary risk. And for small businesses, particularly minority and women-owned businesses, we need to make sure that PPP money gets to them, not to publicly traded companies trying to game the system and put cash in their own pockets. So yes to a bailout, but a bailout for workers and families in this country.
Okay, and we're gonna move on to Becky Grossman.
I mentioned earlier that I think an industry that needs assistance and investment here is the childcare industry. And it is one of the reasons that I believe so strongly in getting the money out of politics, because the way that we're seeing our government behave right now is in thinking about big corporations and their influence, and not of working families, not of the childcare industry, which was something we needed to invest in long before this pandemic ever happened. But we know how many of our childcare providers are in serious trouble right now and are really struggling to make ends meet and to have a business to come back to, an operation to come back to on the other side of this. And that's where I think that our focus needs to be, on families, on what they need to get through this, And if there's an industry I'm thinking about, that's the industry that is top of mind for me.
We're going to move to Alan Casey.
Yes, so on March 16th, I was the first candidate to put out a comprehensive COVID action plan. In that, I called for emergency wage support to save our small businesses and keep people in their jobs as an alternative to the convoluted PPP program that required businesses to get loans. What we found now is that program hasn't worked. Women-owned businesses, people of color-owned businesses did not get the money, and our unemployment rate has gone through the roof. I actually worked with Senator Mark Warner, who brought in Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Doug Jones to introduce this. I still believe we need to do it. It's a 21st century idea. If we did that, Germany's done it, and they don't have the unemployment we have, and the money would go to the people who need it the most and keep our small businesses alive. That's what I do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody.
Along those lines of the economy, Dave Cavell, you want to see additional economic stimulus that protects municipal credit ratings. In a world with limited financial resources, why is that more important than just giving the same money directly to Americans in need?
Well, yeah, look, we absolutely need to surge our investment in people. We need to help workers who've been impacted by this crisis and help families that have been impacted by this crisis. And we're headed toward 20+% unemployment in these communities. It's outrageous. And this is why I support a Green New Deal, because look, there's only 50,000 coal jobs left in this whole country. There's 110,000 clean energy jobs in Massachusetts alone. That's our blueprint. It meets the moment here. These are the big, bold ideas that we need to respond to this crisis. And so that's why I support it. That's why I support finishing South Coast Rail. That's why I support investing in tuition-free public colleges and universities. That's why I support, making real bold investments here, making Fall River the leader in Atlantic offshore wind, and making sure that the South Coast is leading the recovery here, because this is the best way to not just save our planet, but also save our economy as we respond to the greatest crisis of our lifetimes.
Jake Auchincloss, your response?
Lots of candidates are talking about bailouts, but we know that bailouts are not permanently sustainable. The reason that I have gotten the strongest support in the South Coast, the area of this district with the highest unemployment rate, support from Pat Haddad, from Carol Fiola, from Paul Schmid, from IBW 223, is because I'm the only candidate talking about creating jobs. I put forward a life sciences manufacturing plan, working together with state elected officials, with business leaders, with union leaders to chart a path forward for creating great jobs in a growth industry.
Dr. Linos, your response?
Just a rebuttal on that point on jobs. Right now, we can't send workers back to work. We need bailouts while we need to keep some industries closed. We have to build jobs, but right now it's not safe. So we need to keep in mind that the epidemiology is telling us bailouts is what people need. We need to make sure that small businesses don't go under, but that they don't have to force their workers to come in, putting their lives and their families' lives at risk.
Thank you. One of the proposed policies to tackle the affordable housing crisis is a national rent control cap, a government-enforced price control measure that limits the rents that property owners may charge. Jesse Mermel, with your focus on affordable housing, would you support this policy? If yes, how would you implement it? And if not, what would you do to solve the affordable housing crisis?
There's no question that the affordable housing crisis we're facing in this country is an economic crisis, it's a racial justice crisis, it's an environmental crisis. I'm proud to have done a great deal of work, including to the extent of being honored by CHAPA just a year ago for my advocacy work around housing, advocating for changes at the state level. I believe that we do need to explore rent control, but in the immediate term, we need to increase the low-income housing tax credit. We need to increase investments in Section 8 and Section 202 housing. We need to increase investments, capital investments in our existing affordable housing stock, and we need to make the zoning changes that are necessary at the municipal level. That may need to come with a carrot or stick from the federal government, so that the zoning changes are made to allow for increased housing density, increased investments in affordable and workforce housing, so that people can afford to live in dignity within a reasonable distance of where they want to work and play. I've been a leader on this issue for a long time in Massachusetts, and it's a key thing that I'm going to fight for in Washington.
Councillor Auchincloss, your response?
I have walked the walk on affordable housing for 5 years as a city councilor in Newton, taking a series of hard votes to ensure that as a city, we are more inclusive and welcoming, and that we are true to our ideals of being a welcoming city. It's one of the reasons I've earned support from prominent housing advocates and civil rights advocates, because prominent Black leaders in Newton know that our city's history of exclusionary zoning can only be redressed by building more housing. However, nationwide rent control would be to nationalize what has been a bad idea at the local level across this country. What we need is better transportation and expanding housing tax credits. We do not need to take a bad idea and expand it nationally.
Ben Siegel, your response.
Yes, thank you. Look, my dad oversaw public housing authorities and audited them in Fall River and Taunton as a kid. I used to visit with him on these site visits. We need to get rid of the segregation that was caused by our public housing pieces. And we need to have integrated housing that is low income, standard rate, market rate, subsidized, middle income housing all together. We need to get rid of redlining. We need to incentivize our developers, and we need to change our zoning laws. And together we need to connect that with our transportation so that we can have transit-oriented communities.
Within our own district, there exists a large disparity in job access, with an unemployment rate currently of 9.6% in Newton compared to 21% in Taunton. Ben Siegel again, how will you rectify the economic inequalities between the different parts of the Fourth?
Look, we know that systemic racism has been around for over 400 years, right? It went from slavery to Jim Crow to segregation. And so we need to focus on truly eradicating racism in all our systems, including beginning with education. We need to have universal preschool for our 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And we need to make sure we expand early Head Start. We need to make sure that our higher education is affordable and accessible, that our student rates are capped at the lowest fixed percentage of income. And we need to have free adult vocational education that gives the skills and the training to all those who want to move into new jobs, try new industries, or especially after COVID, go into places they've never had before and be retrained. We can use our vocational and our technical schools and invest in them and more, and we need to invest more in our community colleges as well.
Isan Lecky, your response.
Look, we live in a district that is fragmented economically. We have some of the wealthiest towns in the country, coupled with towns that have been lacking of economic opportunity over generations. And that has been the result of lack of leadership and lack of personal lived experiences to lead with compassion and understand how to serve these communities. We have way too much poverty in this district, and we have people who have the economic comfort who should stand up to vote for people who will fight for Medicare for all and a Green New Deal and green public transportation and dignity for the lives of the most vulnerable in our district. That's what I will bring to the table.
Thank you.
We will now be moving on to healthcare. So this next question is going to be a raise your hand question, and then we will take 4 30-second responses after that. Economic inequality is only heightened by a lack of health insurance for many low-income Americans. As of May, 27 million Americans lost employer-sponsored health insurance due to unemployment. Please raise your hand if you support Medicare for all, a single-payer national healthcare system without private options. Thank you. And then we will take 4 people after that to respond. So I saw Ben Siegel first.
Yes, thank you. Look, I believe one day we'll get to a Medicare for all single payer system, but I think we have a few steps before that. Number 1, we have to pass paid family and medical leave for everyone, including undocumented immigrants. Number 2, we need to negotiate prescription drug prices under Medicare, which we can't do right now. Now, for 3 reasons, I think we need to strengthen the ACA, add a public option, and expand Medicare from 65 to 50. Number 1 is it's going to take time to move to a Medicare for all single payer system. And we need to make sure that before that happens, and while that is happening, we're not letting people go uncovered. We're not letting people decide whether to spread COVID-19 or put food on their table. Number 2, we don't have the political votes yet in Congress, and we need that. And number 3, we have to understand the consequences in Massachusetts of moving to that when we have 98% covered here and a thriving life science economy.
Thank you, Ben. I also saw Jesse, Jake, and Isan. I'm going to take Isan, then Jesse, then Jake. sorry, that is all we have time for. We'll have more questions after. So Hassan.
Sorry, just the unmute button is a bit far. So look, this fight for Medicare for all has been personal to me. When I was only 13, I lost my father because I could not afford his medication. And that scar is still inside of my heart and is weakened every time I hear a friend or a relative was lost a loved one because they could not afford their healthcare needs. People are going bankrupt in this country because they do not have healthcare. And we have the tools, we have the wealth to stop it. Millions of Americans are going through the same thing, and the pharmaceutical and health insurance industry is a—
Sorry, Hassan, your time is up. I'm now going to take Jesse Mermel.
I'm proud to support Medicare for all because, quite frankly, we can't afford not to. It was costing us $3.5 trillion before COVID to fail to take action on our failing healthcare system. Imagine what that cost will be when we assess what has come out of our economic failure resulting in our failing healthcare system. Americans stay awake at night worrying about being able to access care or afford prescription drug prices. Particularly in this crisis, we have a responsibility to move on Medicare for all. I've worked for 2 different direct service healthcare providers in Massachusetts. I know how deeply this is impacting patients, and I'm going to go to Washington to lead and make Medicare for all a reality.
Thank you, Jesse. And the last response will be from Jake.
Obamacare was a good law and a good plan. And we, over the last 10 years, have not been able to achieve its full potential because it's been thwarted at every turn by Republicans. So let's allow President Obama's legacy to reach its full potential. Let's build on 3 core principles. 1, healthcare is a human right. It's not a job perk. 2, women must control their own reproductive decisions. And 3, investing in basic medical research and in the teaching hospitals and advanced clinical care is the best way we're going to cure patients and an important way we're going to drive the economy here in Massachusetts.
Thank you, Jake. We will now be moving on to our next question for Alan Casey. One of the largest health problems in Massachusetts, the opioid epidemic. Mr. Casey, you say you will prioritize care over criminality. Would you go so far as to work to decriminalize opioids as has been proven effective in other countries?
Thank you, Will, for that question. This is an unbelievable crisis. We have to move it from a criminal offense to a health issue. We need to make sure that we do decriminalize it. We need to make sure that every single health plan needs to cover treatment for opioid diseases. We need to take it out of the shadows. We need to expand great service programs like are happening in Nashua, New Hampshire, and here in Gloucester and in Kentucky, where we've enlisted AmeriCorps members who are former opioid victims to be counselors to support them. We need to deal with this, especially in the South Coast. I was born in Katanning, Pennsylvania. It was a thriving middle-class town when my mom was growing up. And now, because of the economic devastation, we need to recognize the connection. It's now a capital of the opioid crisis. We need to make sure that we treat this with the urgency that it requires, and that's what I would do. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I saw Natalia's hand first, and then Dave.
As someone who has worked on the opioid crisis, both in New York City as well as now in a center that focuses on health and human rights, I believe we need to ensure that people who use drugs are able to have resources in terms of harm reduction. That includes safe consumption sites. It includes equitable access to treatment, and it includes resources to communities. If we do not do that, and if we do not hold pharmaceutical companies responsible and put some of that money back into communities, we have failed families, we have failed our communities.
Thank you, and Dave.
Well, 5 people die every day from overdoses in Massachusetts alone. And in the AG's office, we sued Purdue Pharma, and the Sackler family makes OxyContin, and we put them out of business. So I made a promise to those families that when I was in Congress, I would get to work on this, and I'm going to keep that promise. This is why folks like Joanne Peterson in Taunton, who runs the largest recovery organization in the state, has endorsed my plan. It's on my website, and it does the things that we actually need to do if we really want to solve this crisis, and if you've worked on it as I have for years.
Thank you. And Dave, this next question is also for you. Government involvement in reproductive health care has proven to be a complicated subject. With recent actions by many southern states to overturn Roe v. Wade, Mr. Cavell, do you believe employers should be required to cover reproductive care in their health care plans? And how exactly do you believe, or do you plan to protect the national right to choose?
100% yes, the answer to your question. So yeah, when I was in the Attorney General's office, we went to court and protected reproductive care for 55 million women under the Affordable Care Act. When I was in law school, I walked out of class with Sandra Fluck because Georgetown wasn't covering contraceptives coverage for its students. That's not acceptable. And so we need somebody who is a champion on this issue. I was in the Attorney General's office working every day with Planned Parenthood, with NARAL, and so many others to oppose a global gag rule and a gag rule in this country, protect Title X funding, particularly for low-income women. And look, I think that the Supreme Court case this week on the Louisiana law, or this month, last month rather, on the Louisiana law was good, but we need to go further. We need people who are going to stand up and stop states from overturning reproductive rights. You can see how I'm going to do that on my website.
Thank you. And then I saw Jesse and then Isan.
So if you want to champion on reproductive justice, allow me to suggest someone who was the head of external affairs at Planned Parenthood during the heart of the ACA debate, fighting to make sure that reproductive care was included as preventive care in that landmark bill, pounding the pavement in Congress to do exactly what you talked about, ensure that employers have to cover reproductive care. And I was devastated by the Supreme Court ruling a few weeks ago. I was the first person in this race to put a reproductive justice plan on our website. I hope you'll go check it out. We have to repeal Hyde, codify Roe in federal law, protect Title X, and make sure that we're banning the.
I'm sorry, but due to time, we do have to get a little bit, we have to make sure we're meeting the time restraints. Isan, you were next.
Thank you. Out of everyone on this panel, this issue is so personal to me. I survived an abortion that was unsafe and almost killed it almost took my life. And I still have a difficulty sharing that. And I know that there's a community that is waiting for somebody who would fiercely fight off any special interests who come between us and our health, our reproductive justice and reproductive health. That's why I support Medicare for all. That's why I don't take pharmaceutical and health insurance money. And that's why this race has been raided by those corporations, but not in my campaign.
Thank you.
Thank you. In the wake of George Floyd's death and the Black Lives Matter movement, we know racial justice is on a lot of your minds here. One major tenet in the fight for racial justice is a change in the system of policing. Natalia, what is your approach to addressing police brutality while also controlling crime rates?
Thanks so much for the question, Jen. I believe strongly that our policing is racist and that we have seen that with the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many more before and after. Structural racism, though, isn't only a problem for policing. It's in all our institutions. I believe that we need to defund and we need to, and by that I mean, we need to give appropriate budgets to the places where we feel our society needs to thrive. Right now, we criminalize poverty. We criminalize homelessness, we criminalize mental illness, and we police communities of colors at disproportionate rates. This all needs to end. Police shouldn't be in schools. We need mental health and social workers. So I believe that we have the moral obligation to rethink budgets, to rethink how we create a society that works for everyone. But really, Jen, I've been working on issues around structural racism for a long time. Even around COVID, I wrote a piece in Foreign Affairs saying that we cannot police public health. We cannot pull people off buses and give them fines for not wearing masks. The police should only be available in small situations, but all of us have a responsibility to do better, and not everybody on this.
Sorry, your time is up. Alan, your response.
Sorry. Yes, we need to, there is an extraordinary racial justice awakening happening in our country. So within a week of the brutal killing of George Floyd, I proposed, along with Cornell William Brooks, the former president of the NAACP, that we should establish an American Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission, chartered by Congress, led by moral leaders like Bryan Stevenson, with a $50 million budget, so that we could make sure there's a federal process to not just do police reform, but also criminal justice reform, economic justice reform, public health reform, and education reform. We started City Year to help complete the civil rights movement. I've been working on these issues my whole life. We show that we can bring people together and discover that our diversity is our greatest strength. I will make this a top priority if you help me get it.
Thank you. Ben Siegel, your response?
Yes, I just published an op-ed in Commonwealth Magazine exactly about this. We need to condemn and eliminate racial profiling, police brutality, and excessive use of force. We need to eliminate police qualified immunity. So if one police officer, or God forbid, a whole department steps over the line, violates someone's civil rights, they're held accountable. We need to create national certifications and decertifications and training for our police, national policies and procedures for the use of force, ban facial recognition technology, and have police cameras in vehicles and body cam. And we need to reallocate resources from our police.
Your time is up. Okay. Many have called for a reallocation of funds from the police budget to services that directly help communities. Becky, what are your thoughts on the movement to defund the police, and could you explain your decision to vote against a bill that would have cut Newton police funding?
Systemic racism that is ingrained in this country is real. It is real in Newton. It is real in every single community in this district. And it is something that we need to be honest about and confront head on. And I believe strongly that Black Lives Matter. In Newton, I'm proud to have voted on 2 occasions, actually, to have taken a total of $400,000. Of those votes, the $200,000 vote was successful out of our police department to reimagine what public safety is going to look like and to fund a task force in Newton that is going to do the real work of tackling systemic racism by looking at what public safety in our community looks like line by line. It designs a public safety system that makes us actually safe and makes people feel safe. I'm committed to a deep and thoughtful examination of how we spend our money on public safety while increasing funding for mental health, rehabilitation, and education services. I'm committed to militarizing the police. I'm committed.
Sorry. Dave, your response.
So look, if we can't vote to defund the police by 1%, how are we going to lead on this issue in Congress? You know, Black Lives Matter, so let's act like it. And I need to add here, I was disappointed that another candidate in this race compared the Confederate flag to a Black Lives Matter flag and an LGBTQ plus pride flag. This isn't about free speech rights. I was an assistant attorney general, I get that. One is a symbol of hate. The others are a symbol of hope. There's no comparison, there's no equivalence, and we need to stand up and be clear about this issue.
Jesse, your response.
Sorry, tricky button. I'm proud to be one of the few candidates in this race who has signed the pledge that some incredible students organizing in Newton to defund the police have circulated, and to pledge not to take money from police unions. Listen, we need to invest in public safety. That doesn't necessarily mean police departments. That means transportation and housing, education, parks, and open space, the things that we know actually create safe communities. I think reinvesting money that otherwise may have gone, at least in part, to police departments into those measures of public safety makes all the sense in the world, in addition to ending qualified immunity, making sure that the Justice Department is looking in to civil rights violations or brutality in police departments.
Your time is up. Thank you. As Dave mentioned, 4 years ago in 2016, students drove through the Newton North High School parking lot waving a Confederate flag. Jake, at the time, you filed a resolution protecting these students' right to speech, though you've stated that you have learned from the incident since. How do you explain this racial insensitivity, and what are your thoughts on free speech now?
I'm glad you raised the question. As you said, about 5 years ago, a group of Newton North students drove through the Newton North parking lot waving the Confederate flag. And at the time, along with several other city councilors, I condemned the Confederate flag as a symbol of hatred and bigotry, which it is, and which I've always believed it is, while also trying to keep the city on the legally correct side of First Amendment protections under the Supreme Judicial Court. And with more political maturity, and in retrospect, I can see that because of my tremendous privilege as a white man, I was able to see that partly as a free speech issue, not fully emphasizing that the Confederate flag has no place near our schools or our children. I've always been an ally to communities of color. I'm proud to have the support of prominent leaders of the communities of color here in Newton and elsewhere, and I'll always be an ally for racial justice in Congress.
Thank you. Natalia, your response.
I think it's really important to walk the talk. And, you know, few of us here have worked on racial justice issues and on racism and explicitly talking about racism for many, many years. I've been doing that on the health front because Black moms, Black babies are dying at disproportionate rates. I've been doing that with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I believe that we have to vote for someone who has been walking the talk and not saying I made a mistake 5 years ago. It's just too late right now to be joining that conversation.
Dave, your response.
Well, I think we all might have just noticed there. You know, Jake, I'm really sorry, but that answer just doesn't cut it. I mean, yes, you saw it as a free speech issue, which as an attorney in the Attorney General's office who worked on civil rights issues, I can tell you it was not. But also, why did your letter to the Newton school superintendent compare the Confederate flag directly to a Black Lives Matter flag and an LGBTQ pride flag and say students would be upset by both? There's no comparison. There's no equivalence. You treated them as the same, and that's wrong.
Jake, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you. Dave's a very good speechwriter. He's always been very good at one-liners. Dave never had to be a policymaker. And when you have to be a policymaker, it means trying to tackle with gray areas and with areas of complexity. There is no question the Confederate flag is a symbol of hate and bigotry. I tried to keep the city on the right side of the First Amendment. I never compared it to a Black Lives Matter flag that is just a attack. But when you're actually in the trenches legislating, when you're actually in the trenches making policy, you sometimes put your neck out there. You don't always get it right. You learn from it and you move on.
Okay, we're going to move on from this question. With the rise of white supremacist expression during the Trump administration, the discussion of HR 40, a bill that establishes a commission to study and develop reparation proposals, has gained more urgency. Alan, do you support the federal government paying reparations to the descendants of slaves? And if so, do you have a plan to implement them?
Jennifer, thank you. As I mentioned, I proposed with Cornell William Brooks an American Commission on Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation that would go beyond the issue of reparations. I want to look at the issue because we have to deal with 400 years of systemic racism. We need to look at criminal justice reform, public health reform, as we're seeing with the coronavirus. It is attacking more low-income people and people of color at much higher, devastating levels. In our public education system, we're seeing now, we're doing this by Zoom. There are too many young people, low-income young people, often people of color, who don't even have access to broadband. I've also proposed broadband for everyone, a public option for broadband. And in our economic justice system, I think if we set up a commission like this, and I'm in full support of Barbara Lee's proposal to do this, one of the things that that commission will do is look at the issue of reparations and of economic justice. The average African-American family in this country has $17,000 in assets. The average white family has $170,000. That is because of systemic racism. We need comprehensive policies to address that. And I will stand up firmly for that. I've been working on these issues my whole life. Thank you.
Ben, your response?
Yes, thank you. I'm absolutely in support of HR 40 and looking into the reparations. But let me just be clear. We're at a time where we and our Black brothers and sisters, and in Newton, when some young Black students are telling some of these candidates here that they would be uncomfortable with them as members of Congress, then we need to listen to them. And I think it's time for some people to step down because they are part of the problem and not the solution.
Natalia, your response?
I'm a huge supporter of reparations. And Alan, your statistic is, if we look at Boston, $8 for a Black Bostonian versus $250,000 for white Bostonians. And the federal government has a responsibility because we cause these wealth inequities through redlining, through Social Security policy. So we have an obligation to redress. We need to have truth and reconciliation, but we need to put the money behind our words, and we need to fight for reparations for Black Americans. Thanks.
Thank you. As of 2016, 6.1 million Americans were forbidden to vote because of felony disenfranchisement laws. And that number has only grown, disproportionately affecting African Americans and Native Americans. Jesse, How will you protect the rights of the disenfranchised populations when many states are currently working to suppress their votes?
Yeah, it is an absolute crisis. And we've seen the impact of it on people's own humanity. We've seen the impact of it in Georgia and Florida and the outcomes of elections. We need to restore the Voting Rights Act. What happened in 2013 when the Supreme Court gutted it has had devastating impacts around the country. We've seen it in special elections with long lines. So Congress needs to restore the Voting Rights Act so that we are protecting all voters, but particularly Black and brown voters, particularly those who have been targeted for disenfranchisement throughout our American history because of the systemic racism that has plagued this country for over 400 years. We need to also make sure, quite frankly, that we are winning elections at local levels in state legislatures and in judiciary offices around the country, because we have seen when conservatives get the jump on us in those places, we wind up with laws across the country that are intentionally disenfranchising Black and brown voters in order to help conservatives win elections.
Thank you. Isan, do you have a response?
I do, thank you. You know, I think that as the only woman of color in this race, there is a space to be claimed here. That I've been in this fight for racial justice since before I joined this campaign. And every single policy that I have put on my issues page has reflected the racial justice that I'm fighting for. I've been organizing with Black and brown communities across the districts for the last 2 years to build together. And I see people who have been in leadership before, who have voted to redline Brookline, to cause more racial injustice in Newton, stepping into this race. And I'm saying, you know, look inwards and come to a job that you can actually deliver. And if you can't deliver at 100%,
that is time.
Then let other people do it.
Thank you all for the responses. Let's take a quick break and do a short question for all of the candidates. If you could describe your campaign in 3 words, what would they be? Starting with Isan.
My campaign is compassionate. It's for racial justice and social justice. That's it.
Thank you. Jake?
Leadership in crisis.
Jesse?
Equity, healthcare, and workers.
Becky?
Progressive mom fighter.
Natalia? Oh, I'm so sorry. Ben?
Sure. We, the fourth.
Natalia?
Science, equity, hope.
Alan?
Sorry about that. People before politics.
And Dave?
Day one ready.
Great. Thank you all.
Now we'll move on to climate change. In 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reported that carbon dioxide emissions would have to fall by at least 45% by 2030 to prevent irreversible damage to our Earth. The Green New Deal was a congressional resolution introduced by Representative Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Markey that called for drastic reductions in fossil fuel usage and curbing greenhouse gas emissions. Please raise your hand if you support a Green New Deal. Thank you. Could Councillor Grossman respond on this, please?
Thank you. I wake up every day with deep concern about the future that we're leaving for not just my kids, but all of our kids. And we are hurtling toward a future where the everyday realities of climate change will overshadow everything else. The climate emergency has already arrived and it's only getting worse. And that's why I support the Green New Deal. We need to mobilize our federal resources to decarbonize our economy, put millions of people back to work with good paying green jobs, invest in a massive infrastructure package and in our public transportation.
Thank you, Becky. Moving on to Ben Siegel.
Yes, thank you. I think what we need to do is actually create an environmental lens office similar to our Congressional Budget Office so that every single piece of legislation is looked through the prism of its effect on the environment. Every single piece, just like we do for every piece of legislation for the budget. We need a holistic response to combating the climate crisis, and it must start with combating environmental racism and injustice.
Thank you. Last response from Alan Casey.
As you saw, we're all for the Green New Deal. The question is, what's your experience in actually getting something like that done? I've been a movement leader in building the service movement. I beat Tom DeLay by building a movement when he tried to kill AmeriCorps in 2003. I beat Mitch McConnell when he opposed the Kennedy Serve America Act, which we got passed in the first 100 days. What I will do is build off of the Sunrise Movement, which is extraordinary, bring together 350.org, the Sierra Club, NRDC, Al Gore's group, Senator Kerry's group, together and build a coalition that takes the will of the people and forces Congress to do what we all want. That's the experience that I have, which I think is different in this race.
Thank you for your responses. In order to fight the climate crisis, we need to have sweeping legislation as well as individual action. Each candidate will have 30 seconds to describe what changes they are making in their own lives to lower their personal carbon footprint. We'll start with Hassan.
Thank you. You know, the first thing that I have done is to raise my daughter believing in climate justice, believing in the Green New Deal, fighting for the Green New Deal as a little 8-year-old. And that's how we carve the way forward, is by educating our own children and raising them on climate justice. I am a fighter for the Green New Deal. I do not take corporate money. I don't take fossil fuel money. And I will fight for you at 100%.
So, thank you, Jake.
We walk and take transit more and more. 40% of the carbon emissions that drive climate change in this state are from transportation. It's why I've called to use the Green New Deal to reinvent transportation in the Commonwealth. All electric regional rail, bus rapid transit, better infrastructure for cycling and walking. I've also signed up for the city's municipal electricity aggregation program, which makes sure that our electricity is greener. And most importantly is committing to be a member of Congress who is going to make sure we get to carbon neutrality goals through carbon pricing.
Thank you, Jake. Jesse?
Well, we can all do more, but I'm proud to be taking some substantial personal steps. I've been a vegetarian since 1992. We all know the impact of the meat industry on carbon emissions. I am a devoted Fitbit nerd. I'm over 500 consecutive days of 10,000 steps, rarely drive, always taking public transit or being on the T. And I've also consistently taken jobs that have allowed me to be at the forefront of this, whether it's making Hubway, then now Blue Bikes happen in Brookline, leading on Transit Climate Initiative or carbon pricing at the Alliance for Business Leadership. I'm proud to have been able to make personal choices to help tackle this crisis.
Thank you, Jesse. Now, Becky Grossman.
Thank you. Well, I'm really proud that my daughter, Madeline, who's 9, is really into this topic along with our whole family. And one of the things that we've started doing recently is composting, which has been terrific. It really reduces the amount of waste that we use. Newton has been really working hard to introduce a composting program. We're doing it in partnership with the company right now, but really looking to expand it. We've had full energy audits up, down of our home, reduced our consumption in every way, both in energy and water usage. And we're going to keep on going forward with more.
Thank you, Becky Grossman. On to Ben Siegel.
Yes, thank you. Several things. Look, as a father, again, of 4 young kids, educating both my kids and myself continually on how we can do more has been number one, and educating our friends and our colleagues, both at work and here. Until I took a leave of absence for this race, I also took the T every single day, the C and D line, to get into work. I've also taken the fossil fuel pledge. We have also worked incredibly on trying to recycle almost everything that we possibly can in our house. We've done full energy audits, and we've changed all the windows in our house to be more efficient with both heat and with cooling down the house.
Thank you. Natalie Alina, your response?
On a personal level, I think I'm the only candidate in a car-free household. I also have cut down on meat consumption, but I do think that this question is a little bit off because it puts the blame on persons and individuals, and I'm in a privileged position to take those changes. I've worked at the United Nations with so many communities that are facing such challenges, and adaptation is equally important. I entered this race through a climate transition, just transition, and racial justice sort of perspective. And I think we need to do that at the policy level. We can't really do it through individual behaviors. And I'm the only candidate who has worked at the United Nations to make sure that countries meet the Paris Agreement.
Thank you. Alan Casey, your response?
So about 3 weeks after I got into the race, I was walking our dog with my 11-year-old son, Reese. And he turned to me and he said, "Dad, I'm really scared." So I stopped and I said, "Reese, why are you scared?" He said, "Because we're killing the planet. With all the pollution and climate change, it won't be here for me and my children." And what I said to him, "Reese, that's why your mom and I supported you and your big sister when you wanted to walk out as part of the Sunrise Movement. It's why I'm running for Congress, and it's not too late." And during this COVID crisis, my son has started a nonprofit called New Generation, New Planet to encourage people to take the behaviors we're doing now, doing things by Zoom, not flying, using public transportation, recycling. And I want to support our kids.
Thank you. Dave Cavell, your response?
Well, I'm working on this personally and professionally. I helped investigate ExxonMobil and sue the Trump EPA. It's why I went into politics, because half of my fourth graders had asthma because of environmental racism. And students, look, you know, you can't play politics on this issue. Jake broke the no fossil fuel money pledge. And when he was a Republican, worked for Governor Baker, who just spent the weekend hanging out with Vice President Pence on Nantucket. Look, one of us takes fossil fuel money, one of us sues fossil fuel companies. Who do you trust to pass a Green New Deal?
Thank you. Jake, you will have time to respond to this later in the debate. We're going to move on to our next question, which is also addressed to Dave Cavell. You support regulations that protect our marine resources. Do these regulations include further cutting the commercial harvest of seafood? And if so, what do you say to the people on the South Coast who see these policies as a threat to their livelihood?
Yeah, so I was the first candidate in this race to endorse a presidential candidate, and I endorsed Elizabeth Warren in part because of her Blue New Deal to protect our oceans and our waters and invest in our long-term sustainable future here. So yes, absolutely. And the truth is, I organized a panel on sustainable offshore Atlantic wind and had the fishing industry on it. They see that fish stocks are collapsing. They see that their livelihoods are at risk. And instead of doing what the Trump administration wants to do, which is open up the entire Atlantic seaboard to offshore oil drilling, they know that what we need here is to invest in our future. So yes, we're going to protect those jobs. We're going to make sure that we have a sustainable ocean. We're going to protect the Clean Water Act. We're going to protect the Endangered Species Act. And we're going to protect our oceans for everyone. So that's what I support. That's what I'm for. And look, I think we need people who have really worked on this issue. We worked with the fishing community in the Attorney General's office. We worked on Atlantic offshore wind. I'm going to help make Fall River the leader in Atlantic offshore wind. It's the second deepest water port in New England. Let's make Brayton Point at Somerset the leader in producing the materials for that offshore wind program. So you know I'm going to lead on this issue.
Thank you.
Okay. Were there any hands for a rebuttal or? Nope. Okay. So we're going to move on to education. Though we've discussed education in relation to COVID-19, we're going to be moving into specifics of pre-K, K through 12, and university education systems. The Metropolitan Council for Educational Opportunity is an educational desegregation program. It's designed to eliminate the racial imbalance in schools by busing students from Boston and Springfield to suburban public schools. Ben, with your knowledge of the METCO program, do you support expanding school busing? Why or why not?
I absolutely do. We need to make sure we're having integrated education. We all learn from each other. Now, one of the real problems is it's really tough on a lot of these METCO students to be moved to across different towns. Some of them, unfortunately, are on very long bus rides. which is unfair to them and their family. But if we can fix that part to make it a lot more closer to them, it's a benefit to them, it's a benefit to the communities that they are all in. This also helps with us combating racism, hatred, bigotry, and anti-Semitism in all forms, because people start learning that lies, stereotypes, and prejudice can turn into hate and a lot worse. And we need to unteach that. And this is a great opportunity to do that.
Great. And we're going to be taking a rebuttal from Auchincloss and Dave Cavell.
This is a comment for Ben Siegel's question or for Dave Cavell's question? A lot to go on here.
We're going to be taking a rebuttal from both of you guys. So this is a response to Ben Siegel's question.
Okay, well, the very first position I ever took when I ran for the city council in Newton was to expand early education, pre-K and full day kindergarten. We've made significant progress on that. And we've made significant progress on a number of issues in Newton that have to do with being a more welcoming, inclusive city. It's one of the reasons why I have support from more than 100 elected and community leaders in Newton, in the place where I grew up, in the place that I've served for the last 5 years. I'm tremendously proud of the broad-based support I have for my hometown. And I think it reflects how I have done my job and how I will do my job going forward.
Great. And Dave Cavell?
Well, you know, our schools are deeply segregated. So yes, let's support METCO, but let's work on that. Let's work on this enormous segregation that we're dealing with right here at home. And so, look, I've got a plan on my website. It's the most comprehensive plan because I was a teacher. It includes universal pre-K, K-12 education, public education, not charterizing our schools, cancel student debt, invest in tuition-free public colleges and universities, and affordable housing, and all the rest. I also support the George Floyd Education Act. Black lives matter, Black history matters, and all students in this country should learn our real history.
Great, thank you, Dave. Much of K-12 education is based on nationalistic textbooks that often glorify the United States and omit much violence towards people of color and contributions from those same groups. Isan, how do you plan to address systemic racism in school curricula?
Thank you. So as a parent on the Parents Advisory Committee of the Brookline school system, I saw a statistic that shocked me, that in one of the wealthiest towns in our district, no matter what your income background, if you're a Black student, you are highly likely to underperform on math and sciences. And that's because we don't have enough Black and brown teachers and administrators and support staff. We don't have Black people and brown people on the board system. And then when we look at Brookline, for example, we see that the majority of people who are in poverty are people of color. So when we're thinking about education and desegregation, we have to think about how are we going to open up these towns so that they're not only allowing in those who are wealthy, and those who are wealthy tend to also be those who are not people of color, as we know this from our systemic racism. But most important as well, is that my goal is to make sure that every child in this district receives the same high quality education, that the children in Fall River have the same high quality education as those in Wellesley.
Okay, we're gonna take a rebuttal from Becky Grossman.
There's no doubt that the systemic racism in this country is real, and that we need to be looking system by system by system at how that plays out. And education is absolutely one of those places that we need to continue to make sure that we are being very straightforward in how we're teaching history, being very open and transparent, and confronting head on the legacy of racism and oppression in our country, because through education is how we learn.
Okay, so we're going to take a response from Dr. Linos.
Just because Dave has said he's the only teacher, I did teach for 2 years overseas right out after college. I taught in Lebanon, so I can't say it was a US public system, but I did also run their community service program, bringing kids into Palestinian refugee camps and trying to work on that hatred that exists, whether you're in the US or overseas. I think we need to focus on curricula, We need to make sure that we teach about the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and everything that has happened since. And this is our opportunity right now. At a time of Black Lives Matter movement is calling for us to rethink everything. Let's rethink our education system. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So MCAS is designed to measure a student's progress through their school career and address the quality of school districts. Jesse, if you plan to pause MCAS testing, what other methods could be used to track a student's progress and measure the educational inequities in our school system?
It's such a great question, and it's an exciting question. I'm the former executive director of FAIR Test, the National Center for Fair and Open Testing, working to end misuse of high-stakes standardized testing in public schools and for college admissions. We can use a system of multiple measures. It's something that Nebraska used to use. It doesn't mean that you might not have a standardized test, which wouldn't be high stakes. And we'd rely on in-classroom assessment, grades, perhaps an end-of-year project. We know that there's no greater determinant of how a student will progress moving forward than good old-fashioned grades, how your teacher says you're doing and how you're improving. We know that there is racial bias built into standardized testing in the way the questions are written and the prep for it. I'm proud to have the endorsement of the Massachusetts Teachers Association in this race. They know firsthand what students need to advance and to succeed. I'm proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with them, and MCAS, high-stakes standardized testing, is not the way to go.
Okay, and we're gonna take a response from Ben Siegel.
Yes, look, we know in 2019 in 8th grade math that we overall in Massachusetts finished ranked #1 in the country. But if you were Latino, we ranked 50th in the country. The education inequality gap on the standardized testing is not working. We need teachers. Only 3% of teachers are Latino and 20% of our students are. We need teachers that look like and understand their perspectives and can teach towards our students with proper personal evaluations that are made in the classroom and de-emphasize our national tests.
Time is up. Okay, and we're gonna take a response from Dave Cavell.
So Natalia, I didn't know that you were a teacher. That's great. Look, I saw the failure of high stakes testing as a teacher. And in my education plan, I call for moving away from standardized testing. When I worked with Michelle Obama, she was pushing for arts and music education, for more comprehensive assessments of student success. That's what I'm for. And the George Floyd Education Act, sorry for getting ahead of that question, is something that I propose that would do that as well and figure out what do we teach and when do we teach it? How do we teach the real history of this country, including Black history?
Natalia, you plan to ban public colleges from considering criminal history in the admissions process. However, one reason public colleges have considered the criminal history of applicants to keep the keep the campus safe from violent offenders. How do we prevent future crimes on campus even through your plan?
Listen, I'm deeply concerned about crimes on campuses, but the crimes I'm concerned about involve violence against women, sexual harassment, rapes. I'm not as concerned about, other types of violence. And I don't think those, privileged youth we have seen, even if they have been convicted or, there's testament, get out of having that on their records. I think the criminal legal system is broken, it is racist, and it has to not prevent people from being able to vote in the future, get a job in the future, and certainly not harm people's opportunities for education. I believe that we need colleges to be safe, but in the same vein that I believe that the police are not the first responders for some of our social ills, I believe students can be safe through better talking about things like consent or talking about issues around well-being. I also believe that we need to ensure that we do not replicate the racist systems outside of education within our education systems, and that is why I stand for that.
So unfortunately, we're tight on time, so we're not going to be taking responses for this question in the next, so that we can make sure that everyone can answer all the questions that we have planned. Alan, your proposed change to the Eli Siegel Education Award will allow anyone who can serve their communities and country for 2 years to graduate college debt-free. How will you expand this ability of debt-free college to those financially unable to spend 2 years of their lives in service?
Well, thank you. So I have proposed something called Restore the Dream accounts, which would mean that for every child born in America, $15,000 would be invested by the federal government, paid by the estate tax, into an account for them. By the time that young person reaches the age of 19, that is worth $50,000 with just very moderate average returns. But to get that $50,000, you do 1 year of national service. And I want that funding to be available for the American dream, to pay for college, to be startup money, to be a small business or not-for-profit entrepreneur like I was out of school, for your first down payment on a home, for emergencies. We're seeing now that $500 is an emergency for half of our country now. And we're seeing the lines for food banks, et cetera, for lifelong learning, and for savings from retirement. If we had these Restore the Dream accounts, we would deal with the issue of asset inequality. In the meantime, I do think everybody, when you serve, you're paid. You get paid a stipend and a post-service award. And I think anybody who is willing to serve should be able to graduate from debt-free from college. And I think people could do that.
Thank you so much.
So our next question is going to be about gun control. Unfortunately, we are a little bit short on time, so I'm going to ask that everyone limits their response to 30 seconds for this one. Children today are living in a time where active shooter drills are a normality. An average of 100 people are killed by guns per day. Gun deaths have increased by 16% from 2014 to 2017. This seemingly insurmountable issue must be solved, and it will be one of your jobs as a member of Congress to address it. What distinguishes your gun control policy from the other candidates? So we're going to go down the line. So I'll take Hassan Leckie first.
Thank you. I've had a gun pointed at my head once. My friend watched her husband being shot across the street from her. And I have a child who I have to talk to about schools across our districts and across our country being attacked. This is the reality in America. I've taken on the biggest banks in the country, and I will take on the NRA and fight to end the epidemic of gun violence in this country and pass the common sense gun safety legislation that the overwhelming majority of Americans want.
Thank you. And now Jake.
Democrats lose on the guns issue, not because we have the wrong message. It's a popular policy platform. It's because we have the wrong messengers. I'm a former Marine Special Operations Officer. I slept 8 train patrol with an AR-15 for 4.5 years. I will be an effective messenger for a comprehensive gun safety platform, of which I was the first candidate in this race to put forward. Red flag laws, universal background checks, taking guns out of the hands of domestic abusers, getting to a common sense gun safety position in this country with strong Democratic leaders who are veterans and can make the case directly to the American people.
Thank you, Jake. And now Jesse.
Thank you. I'm proud to have the Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate distinction, one of them in this race. Listen, I appreciate your framing, Will, around schools and children, and that is incredibly important. But this issue is so much more comprehensive than that, and we have to have that conversation. This is about people experiencing violence in their communities, potentially violence at home. We need to pass the Violence Against Women Act. This is about suicide. So yes, that frame of schools and children is essential. We know that we've all been so troubled by what we've seen around the country now for decades, but we have to think broader than this because the devastation of gun control, of gun safety, and the violence that plagues our country is touching so many communities and so many people. And I think I uniquely bring that broader lens to this conversation.
Thank you. And now Becky Grossman.
You heard me talk earlier about how on my son Jack's first day of kindergarten, I had to struggle to find the words to explain to him what it would mean to run in a zigzag pattern or find a quiet place to hide in his classroom. Gun violence is tearing apart our communities and disproportionately communities of color. If we are going to get serious about tackling gun violence, we have got to get the money out of politics and take on the NRA. When I talk about being a mom in this race, that's what I'm talking about. That is the fierce urgency that I am going to bring to Congress to take on the NRA, to get money out of politics, and to get the power out of their hands and defend our communities, our streets, our schools, our kids, and our future.
Thank you, Becky. Now Ben Siegel.
Thank you. We know gun violence is an epidemic. It's a safety issue. It's an economic issue. It's a women's issue. It's a kids issue. It's the second leading cause of death in kids is gun control and gun violence. So that is 15% of our kids. We need federal universal background checks, not just on guns, but on ammunition. We need to ban assault weapons and ban high capacity magazines. It should not be easier to get your driver's license than it is to get a license to own a gun and registration. We need stronger gun licensing laws, and we need stronger gun identification requirements.
Thank you, Ben. And now Natalia.
So I agree with many people on this panel around the NRA, around what we need to do. I think my approach is different because I'm a public health expert. So I see it as an epidemic, and I have worked for projects and programs like Cure Violence. I also see it from a global perspective. I've worked for the United Nations for 10 years. And the fact that our country has the most deaths by gun violence, I mean, it surpasses 10 times more than any other country, means that we can learn a lot from the international experience. I will bring that perspective, the public health perspective and the global perspective, to end this epidemic here.
Thank you. And now Alan Casey.
Here again, we're all for gun safety. Thanks. But the question is, what's your track record? What's your strategy? I worked with March for Our Lives. Thanks to your generation, this is now a voting issue, to build the 800 sibling marches that mobilized 2 million people. The strategy we used to beat Tom DeLay to save AmeriCorps was a round-the-clock, 100 hours straight people's filibuster inside the Congress. I want to do the same thing, partnering with March for Our Lives and other gun safety groups. We will launch a nonstop filibuster. I'll invite people to come. If 50,000 people sign up, we'll go around the clock for a year, and we will finally break the back of Mitch McConnell and break the back of the NRA.
Thank you, Alan. Now last, but certainly not least, Dave Cavell.
It's a national tragedy that all of you students watching grew up doing active shooter drills in your classrooms, and that Black Americans are 10 times more likely to die from gun violence. I'm the one who helped fight the NRA. So I also have the Moms Demand Action distinction because in the AG's office, we upheld our assault weapons ban in federal court and worked with March for Our Lives to pass a red flag law here in Massachusetts. I'm a speechwriter. Massachusetts has a story to tell. We have the lowest rate of gun violence in America because we know strong gun laws save lives. That's what I'm going to fight for with you in Congress.
Thank you so much, Dave. So this next question, we're going to go back to our regular format where we'll have a minute response for the person that is addressed and then 2 30-second rebuttals. This is about immigration, and it is to Hassan Leckie. Immigration and Customs Enforcement was set up in response to the terror attacks on 9/11. The most well-known division of this arm of Homeland Security detains and deports undocumented immigrants. So you have called for abolishing ICE. What kind of are your thoughts there?
Well, we have a cruel and inhumane immigration system where millions of people are living in fear of deportation, where little kids are separated from their families, held in cages and forced to appear in front of judges on their own. We need to stand up for immigrant communities and fight for humane immigration policies. That means abolishing ICE and CBP, two redundant agencies that are terrorizing immigrant communities. We have to get rid of the Muslim ban and put a moratorium on deportation. We must eliminate the immigration backlog and create an immigration system that gives a pathway to citizenship for all undocumented people in this country. This issue is personal to me. My mother is stuck here because of COVID. She is on a visitor visa. We had to spend $2,000 to extend her visa, and we're afraid of ICE showing up at our doorstep every single day. This is not American, and this is inhumane, and it's got to stop.
Thank you. And then I saw Jesse, and I believe I saw Natalia Linos after that.
Right. You know, I'm the daughter of an immigrant, and my entire family is appalled by the way that ICE and the entire federal government are treating immigrants. Listen, we absolutely have to center this as a moral issue, but we also need to talk about it as an economic issue. Human rights first, the moral piece first, but we will crumble as an economy, both in Massachusetts and around the country, without immigrants. 1/5 of Massachusetts workers are immigrants. I was proud at the Alliance for Business Leadership to stand up for those with TPS status, to advance the Global Entrepreneur in Residence program here in Massachusetts. We need to make sure that we are thinking holistically about the many ways in which the immigrant community contributes to our country. They have our back, we have to have theirs.
And then I saw Natalia Linos after that.
So I was born to international students in the US in Cleveland. They moved back to Greece when I was a month old. I grew up there until I was 17, and I moved to Massachusetts at 17 to go to college. I am very much an immigrant who didn't have to worry about nationality. I'm able to run for Congress, not having to worry about any of that. But I'm also a public health expert during COVID who knows that our anti-immigrant policies is what has put us at risk of COVID. Contact tracing requires that you tell people who you've been in touch with. If immigrants are scared that ICE will show up at their door, they're not going to do this. This is our Achilles heel, and it has shown us today that our anti-immigrant hate is actually costing all of us.
Thank you so much.
So now we will be moving on to the final portion of our debate before closing statements with campaign finance. Among the 8 candidates debating tonight, some of you have partially self-funded your campaigns. Ihsan Lecky, as the largest self-funder with more than 50% of your money coming from your out-of-pocket, how do you respond to critics who say you're essentially trying to buy this congressional seat? And do you think that as a Democratic candidate, your campaign should be powered by the people you pledge to support?
Absolutely. You know, the corporate interests have attacked every single human in this district. There is pharma money pouring into the other people here campaigns. There is fossil fuel money pouring in. There is a lot of special interest money. There is long-term relationships that have dealt into the lives of the immigrants, into the lives of people of color, into the lives of the poor people in this district. And I will make sure to stop that. Look, during COVID-19, I had to put my hands into my own life savings to step up for those who could not give the $50 anymore because they've lost their jobs and they've lost their health insurance. I have run this campaign for 14 months on small dollar donations. And I had given to my campaign a small portion in the beginning to guarantee the wages of people who worked for me. So I will continue to bring only clean money to this campaign because I have the interests of the people of this district at 100%, and because I'm the only one who.
Okay, and now we will take one response from Jessie Mermel.
You know, I think transparency and accountability are so important in this race, particularly as Donald Trump is eroding trust in public service and in government. I've released 6 years of my tax returns. We've challenged the entire field to do the same. Thankfully, Dave and Natalia have joined me to an extent in doing that. But I hope that the rest of the field will do the same, or if they're not, say why they won't to voters. I think it is incredibly important that as people are self-funding, as corporate PAC money, as fossil fuel money funnel into this race, that people see the tax returns and can understand from a transparent way where people's money is coming from.
Thank you. And now we need to move on to our final question, which will go to Jake. As Dave mentioned earlier, you were recently removed from the No Fossil Fuel Money pledge after failing to refund a donation. Could you please explain why you failed to return the money?
This contribution came from an owner of gas stations in the state. And while I heard many people talk about personal changes they're making, nobody said they've stopped using gas stations. This pledge, frankly, has entirely lost credibility in the sense that it keeps Ihsan Lecky on, who has taken $800,000 of personal funding from largely derived from Boston Energy Trading and Marketing Company. And mostly this pledge is really just an attack on my character. Anybody who knows—
Just stop lying, Jake. Stop lying. Stop lying. It's not healthy for our community to run negative campaigns.
You'll get your opportunity to respond after Jake's said.
Oh, sorry, you say that we don't have opportunities to respond before. That's why.
That was for the other question.
May I speak, please?
Yes.
Anybody who has seen my record in the city council knows that there is no stronger advocate in this race for environmental issues. It's why I have the endorsement of the leading advocate for environmental issues in the city of Newton. I'm a 100% aligned voter for Green Newton priorities. And I've put forward comprehensive plans to reinvent transportation through the Green New Deal and to implement carbon pricing day one.
Okay, so Ihsan, you were mentioned in that response, so you will have 30 seconds to respond.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, my apologies to the community of District 4 for anyone on this panel who has been running negative campaigns and lying about where my hard-earned money has been coming from. My husband and I, we lived through poverty, and we will be releasing our taxes going back through the 14 years of our marriage and going back to show you that on our first year, we made $7,000. My husband lifted boxes at the pharmacy at 4 a.m. while I went and mopped the floors at the restaurants. We never took a dime of dark money. And like Jake, who has been pouring in the fossil fuel and the money from the pharmaceuticals into this race. I'm sorry, Jake, you should drop.
Jake, you were specifically mentioned, so if you want to give a quick response, you can.
No, I'm not going to respond to that kind of vitriol. I want a positive campaign. I'm proud to say that we have raised the majority of our contributions last quarter from in-district, unlike the other candidates in this race who've been raising from out of district and frankly, who have been self-funding to a huge degree. A number of candidates in this race have been putting in more money to their campaigns than is the average cost of a home in the United States. That's not reflecting the people that they're serving to represent.
Alan, you have the last word on this question, and then we will move to closing statements.
Yes, I've taken the fossil fuel pledge. And 10 years ago, when I ran for the Senate, I was, I think, among the very first congressional candidates to refuse to take any corporate PAC or lobbyist money. It was a lonely fight then. It's become a litmus test now. I've put out a comprehensive plan to fix our democracy, to deal with money in politics, electoral reform, gerrymandering. I want to put term limits on the Supreme Court because they've run amok. Larry Lessig, who's the #1 champion for democracy reform, has endorsed my plan. I'm not self-funding the campaign. I'm raising money. I've got more than 2,800 individual contributions, which I'm proud of. And I will fight for democracy reform by building a movement to get it done, because everyone in this country realizes we have to fix our democracy to make it work for all of us.
Thank you. We will now move to closing statements. We will begin with Ihsan Lecky.
Thank you. Thank you so much for hosting us and for allowing true democracy to take space today. We have an opportunity to make history in the race and send a message to Donald Trump that we are ready for real progressive change. If we work together for the most vulnerable people in our communities, we can end unnecessary suffering and create a society where the ultra wealthy pay their fair share, where we have Medicare for all and a Green New Deal, where we guarantee affordable housing and pre-K and all, for all, and where Black lives truly do matter. To achieve this vision, we need to build strong grassroots coalitions and bring people into the political process who have been left out for too long. That's why I'm proud to be endorsed by national progressive leaders like Representative Ilhan Omar and local leaders from Brookline to Fall River. Leaders like Nika Elaguardo, Donnell O'Neill, and Erica Scott Pacheco, Newton City Councilors Emily Norton and Bill Humphrey, and many, many more. And I'm proud to have the support of strong progressive organizations like Mass Peace Action, Progressive Needham, and Boston DSA. I hope you will join us in our fight to create the America that we all dream of, the America we truly were promised.
And next will be Jake.
Thank you all for having me. I've enjoyed this evening. Viewers probably will have noticed that I've taken some incoming heat this evening. Good thing I've got training in the military and in local politics to be thin, tough-skinned. And I'm taking incoming heat because I'm setting the pace in this campaign. As opposed to engaging with me with positivity, they're engaging with me with negativity. I'm setting the pace in this election by putting together a full district campaign, building off a tremendous base of support that I have in Newton from the people that I've worked with, from the people that I live with, all the way through the South Coast. Support from Representative Pat Haddad, from Representative Carol Fiolo, from Representative Paul Schmidt, from union leaders, North and South, from business leaders, North and South. I'm the candidate who can unify the Massachusetts 4th, who can represent our values and can take the fight to Donald Trump and stand up to his dangerous, hateful agenda. I am a leader who is crisis tested, and I'm ready for the crisis on day one in next congressional term.
And next will be Jesse Mermel.
Thank you so much to the students of the Massachusetts 4th and to WBUR City Space. It's been a pleasure to be with you. You know, when I launched my campaign in Fall River last October, I never could have imagined that the fights of my life, the fights for equity to create opportunity, would have been even more important today than they were last fall. But because of the incredible failures of leadership we've been seeing coming out of the White House, we are in a place where, quite frankly, we need a proven progressive to go to Washington and represent the 4th Congressional District, to fight for Medicare for all, to fight against Donald Trump and his cronies, to fight for reproductive justice, and to lead that equitable recovery from COVID-19. Don't take my word for it. Look at the progressive leaders and organizations around the state who have kicked the tires on this race and who are standing with me. Ayanna Pressley, Mass Teachers Association, the Coalition for Social Justice, a behemoth organizing group coming out of the South Coast. Leaders in Taunton, we just earned the endorsement of State Representative Carol Doherty, Mass Nurses Association, IBEW Local 103, and so many others. I am proud to be building the grassroots progressive coalition that is essential for any Democratic candidate. I hope tonight that I have earned your support, demonstrated to you that I'm the candidate to lead a progressive, bold future for this district. I hope you'll join me in this campaign. Go to our website, jessiemermel.com, and I thank you for this important conversation this evening.
Next will be Becky Grossman.
Thank you so much for having me this evening. I am running for Congress with the fierce urgency of a mom fed up by what is going on in Washington and determined to make change. I wake up every day thinking about the future that we're leaving for our kids and how we are going to safeguard that future. That's why I won't stand for the NRA threatening our communities, our kids, our safety, and our future. That's why I won't stand for big drug companies ripping off people like my mom who rely on life-saving medication and are charged thousands of dollars a year in prescription drug costs and have to choose between the roof over their head or the food on the table that they need to feed their families, which is what families all over this country face. That's why I won't stand for big oil putting our planet in peril. I'm especially proud to be running at a time when we only have 25 moms of school-aged children in Congress. That is a perspective that is missing and that is needed. And I am proud to offer that voice. I ask for your vote, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all tonight.
Thank you. And next will be Ben Siegel.
Thank you so much, students from Massachusetts 4th, and to all my fellow candidates. It's been a pleasure to be on this Zoom virtual platform with all of you. Look, as you can tell tonight, we're not that far on the major issues, but our approaches are so different. So if you believe we need a leader who's a unifier, a bridge builder, and a connector, then vote for Ben Siegel. If you believe it's time that we elect a diverse leader who understands the diverse perspectives of the community, racially, geographically, economically, then vote for Ben Siegel. If you believe that that this election should not be determined by access to money or self-funding, but by someone who's going to amplify the voices of this district, then vote for Ben Siegel. If you believe it is time to elect the first Latino ever to Congress from Massachusetts, then vote for Ben Siegel. And if you believe that your next leader should be someone who has visited and been part of standing up and speaking with all 34 cities and towns in this district, then vote for Ben Siegel. So I ask that you go to our website to learn more and be part of our We the Fourth movement at Ben Siegel for Congress. Follow us on social media channels, and I hope to have your vote on September 1st.
Next will be Natalia Linos.
Thank you so much for tonight. It's been a pleasure talking to all of you about a range of issues, but I want to take it back to the beginning and the fact that we are living in unprecedented times. We're in the middle of a global pandemic that our country, our world has never seen before. And if it wasn't for COVID, I would not be on this panel, but I am an epidemiologist. I am someone who has 10 years of experience with the United Nations dealing with global emergencies. I worked at the New York City Health Department during Ebola, and I have the skills that are needed for this moment. Our next Congress is going to be deciding how to develop a vaccine, how to roll it out equitably. We're going to be discussing how to get kids back into school safely and how to do that in a way that doesn't impact on educational achievement and widen the gap. I'm the only candidate here who has the technical expertise that is needed to be part of those conversations. Right now, Congress as a whole only has 14 scientists, one person with a PhD in epidemiology. We need more people like me, especially at a time when Donald Trump is scapegoating, sidelining all scientists. And I'm the only person who has worked on climate change too, because that is the future. That is where science will be under attack and has been under attack for the future. So if you believe that we need scientists in Congress, we need people who look at data, who look at evidence, but who have a progressive, value-based, equity-based agenda, then vote for Natalia Linas, because I am different. I don't have the endorsements from all the politicians because I'm not a politician, but I have been doing the fight for 15 years, and I have the endorsement of 150 healthcare workers who think that you need me to help us get through this mess the Trump administration has got us into.
And next will be Alan Casey.
We are living through an unprecedented historical moment with three major crises at once: the coronavirus health crisis, the resulting economic crisis, and the racial justice crisis, which has led to this unbelievable awakening of more than 35 million people now peacefully protesting. We have plenty of lawyers and legislators and lobbyists in Congress. We don't have enough movement leaders. 32 years ago, when I started City Year, we said we have to do this in a different way. Politics don't change anything, people do. We said we had to build a movement, and we did, to inspire MA-04, to save it when Republicans tried to kill it, and to grow it, and 1.1 million people have done it now. If you work with me to get me into Congress, I don't want to go alone. I want to bring all of you with me. Your generation is on the forefront of every major issue: the Green New Deal, March for Our Lives and gun safety, LGBTQ+ rights, racial justice. It's going to take all of us to get this done. And that's what I would be honored to do. My campaign's run by young people. I've spent my whole life working with young people and trying to empower young people to make a difference. I can't wait till your generation's in charge. I would be honored to have your support and get involved in the campaign. You can see me at alankasey.com. Thank you.
And lastly, but certainly not least, we will have Dave Cavell.
Well, thank you all so much again. Yes, we are in a pandemic and an economic crisis, but we are also at a transformational moment in this country. So look, if Taylor Swift could make folklore during this pandemic, just imagine what we can do together. I think we've kicked the can down the road so long on these issues that we've run out of road. So if you want somebody who's actually going to get to work with you and for you on these issues, I think this is the campaign for you. I'm the only candidate that's put out a pledge disavowing dark money and super PAC money, and I call on my co-candidates to join me. As I said, I was the first candidate in this race to take a stand and endorse a presidential candidate, and I endorsed Elizabeth Warren because she's ready to make big transformational change, and I'm going to go to Congress to do that with her. I'm the only one that has been part of a team that actually sued Donald Trump and his administration 50 times. I'm the one that worked with President Obama to make real change for people in this country. From the first day I launched this campaign, my website was not just in English, but in Spanish and in Portuguese too, because I don't think that you can represent everybody in this district unless you're talking to everybody in this district. So go to davecavell.com, sign up to be part of a movement that can't be bought. My old boss, Michelle Obama, used to tell young people, there is so much history yet to be made. Let's go make some history together. Thanks, and stay safe and healthy.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your thoughtful closing responses. And that concludes our debate. I want to thank everyone for watching. On September 1st, voters in the 4th District of Massachusetts will have the opportunity to vote in the congressional primary, and we hope you'll get out there and vote. There are only 100 days left. We hope this debate will help to inform your vote. We'll be hosting more events in the future, so please keep an eye out on Facebook and Instagram for that. This debate will be available after tonight on YouTube and on our social media pages, where you can find us under @Students of MA-04. We also want to extend a special thanks to Mark Lanigan, Bosavana Kemercote, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, Emily Zhang, Dylan Arkowitz, Andrew Kupovich, Andy He, Sophie Lewis, Sarah Saloom, Evan Francis, William Kimani, Simone Klein, Jack Burns, Shiv Sahini, and Lucy Che in helping us organize this debate and draft some of the policy questions. Finally, I want to thank my fellow moderators for doing a fantastic job. Levi Treston, Will Woodring, Jennifer Wang, and Kate Esbenshade. And I want to thank you all, our 8 candidates, for the excellent job you did and really answering the questions thoughtfully and giving, the voters of the Massachusetts 4th a glimpse into what they can expect for this very crowded field. Have a great week, and thank you so much for tuning in, and stay tuned. We have a lot more exciting stuff coming in the future.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Great
Thank
job
you.
tonight.
Thanks for having us. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.